We are in the 80th anniversary of the Battle of Berlin. Despite the years that have passed, many aspects of this battle remain unknown because the mainstream media always reproduce the same cliches. In today's program, we are going to analyze 6 aspects of the Battle of Berlin, which I am sure you did not know. In addition, I will announce a real bombshell at the end. The first of the curiosities that we are going to see, following a chronological order of the battle, was what happened with the so-called Seydlitz Troops. The term Seydlitz Troops was not new to the German High Command. However, at the end of 1943 and beginning of 1944, the term began to circulate more and more frequently among high-ranking German officers. These were former prisoners of war from the Wehrmacht, who the Soviets used in both covert and direct combat actions to help them obtain information, deceive German forces, and launch better coordinated attacks. They were named after General Walter von Seydlitz, who was captured at the Battle of Stalingrad in early 1943. Seydlitz was a key Soviet collaborator and soon became the leader of the League of German Officers and a leading member of the National Committee for Free Germany. Once the war reached German soil, this organization was able to act more effectively, and many of these communist sympathizers and soldiers who were against Hitler became more active against their compatriots on the west bank of the Oder. Their mission was to convince other German soldiers and civilians that continuing the fight was futile and that surrender was their best option. On the 15th of March 1945, Goebbels noted in his diary that the National Committee for Free Germany appeared to be directing propaganda towards Berlin for the first time, but without any results. These soldiers often appeared in sectors of the front where Soviet offensive activity was paralyzed and were used to soften up the target before their attack. His appearance on the battlefield and his activities to deceive German formations increased throughout the Oder front during March and April. It was precisely on April 11th, 5 days before the Battle for Berlin began, that Krebs felt the need to issue a warning to the commander of Army Group Vistula. The message read as follows: "There are increasing indications that the enemy is increasing the use of traitors from Seydlitz, who infiltrate among our own troops to deceive. The troops must exercise greater vigilance and exercise strong suspicion over every unknown soldier, whether a private, officer, or general. If the identity of the person is not immediately known, immediate provisional detention is necessary." Does this remind you of what happened to the Americans in the Ardennes? In addition, during the Battle of Berlin, the Soviets dropped more than 50 million leaflets by air, urging Germans to surrender, assuring them that they would be treated well. To measure their effectiveness, they included a safe conduct pass that soldiers had to hand in when they surrendered, and it was found that almost 50% of those who surrendered carried one. Finally, they resorted to loudspeaker messages, falsely claiming that Germany had already surrendered in order to weaken the morale of the troops. Curiosity number 2 has to do with the air battle that took place during the Battle for Berlin. Whenever this final battle is mentioned, 2 things are assumed. The first is that the Luftwaffe did not intervene at all because it was completely finished. The second is that the Americans did not intervene in the battle because they were based on the Elbe River. But is this true? The answer is no. On April 16th, the first day of the Soviet offensive, the Luftwaffe sent in the reserves it had been saving for the occasion with the little fuel it had left. In total, just over 300 Luftwaffe aircraft went into action in the skies near the Seelow hills, destroying numerous Soviet tanks. It is estimated that of the 300 planes that attacked, about 12 were shot down in combat against the Soviet fighters. However, when the German fighters returned to their bases, located southwest of Berlin, they were in for a big surprise. Hundreds of American fighters and bombers were waiting for them at their base, and while the Germans were about to land, the Americans destroyed at least 40 German planes. Thus, we see the impossible situation that the Luftwaffe was facing at this time. The third curiosity we are going to look at today took place on April 20th, just hours after Zhukov's first Belarusian front broke through the defenses of the German Ninth Army in the Seelow Hills. On the morning of April 20th, with the defense line at Seelow practically broken, Heinrici telephoned Riemann, who at that time held the position of commander of the defense of Berlin, and ordered him to make sure that all the defenders of Berlin were sent to the front. Riemann replied that 15 battalions of the Volkssturm were already on their way. However, Heinrici insisted that he search the city again to find more troops. Heinrici said, "Don't you understand the purpose of my order? Remember our conversation with Minister Speer. If we evacuate the city of soldiers, we will avoid fighting inside it and reduce the damage. The battle must be decided outside its gates." Riemann, understanding the gravity of the instruction, replied, "Yes, that is clear. I will find a way to justify this measure." Shortly afterward, General Riemann was dismissed as commander of the defense of Berlin. This was because Goebbels pressured Hitler for his dismissal, convinced that Riemann was deliberately dismantling the city's defense by relocating the Volkssturm outside of Berlin, which was indeed true. With this decision, control over the defense of Berlin was taken out of Heinrici's hands. Despite Heinrici's attempts, the final fight would end up taking place on the streets of Berlin, resulting in tens of thousands of casualties. The following curiosity is completely unknown, and it has to do with the Red Cross. Does the term hospital cities ring a bell? In mid-April, the International Red Cross proposed that combat-free zones be established within Germany so that the wounded and refugees could go to these sectors. A few days later, specifically on April 21, 1945, the German High Command issued a directive prohibiting the creation of so-called hospital cities. The German High Command feared that these zones would demoralize the troops, allowing them to take refuge instead of continuing to fight. Therefore, Wilhelm Keidel categorically prohibited their implementation, as well as any negotiation with the enemy on the matter. The directive stated the following. Point 1. No German city will be considered a hospital, nor will there be medical zones. Point 2. All discussion on the subject is prohibited, especially among medical officers. Point 3. Troops must be informed immediately. The fact that this directive was issued at all suggests that in the days leading up to it, the International Red Cross had contacted Germany via Sweden or Switzerland, raising the possibility of establishing hospital cities. Theoretically, these areas would have been combat-free zones where civilians and wounded could take refuge in an attempt to reduce humanitarian suffering in the final stages of the conflict. However, it is highly unlikely that the Allies would have accepted this proposal, given what they did to the city of Dresden as late as February 1945. In short, with this directive, the Third Reich reaffirmed its policy of total resistance, even in the final moments of the war. The fifth curiosity of this program was an event that took place on April 24th. With Berlin surrounded by the Red Army, the head of the Reich Service Dog and Carrier Pigeon Department sent an unusual letter on Himmler's letterhead to Heinrici, who held the position of Commander-in-Chief of Army Group Vistula. The letter offered the use of the Service Dog Detachment to supplement Heinrici's forces. In this way, it was foreseen that about 100 messenger or protector dogs would be sent, as well as another 60 to transport supply sleds to be used in offensive engagements. An SS commander named Müller would be sent to coordinate these actions. This is the first and only reference to this special unit of dogs trained for offensive action. All indications are that the early conversations did not suggest that dogs would be used, and that the SS were working to try to encourage Heinrici to attack. There is no evidence to suggest that these special dog units were used in direct action against the Soviets. In any case, this letter shows us how desperate the situation was, in that due to the lack of gasoline to run the transport vehicles, the idea was to resort to dog sleds. And finally, let's move on to the sixth and last curiosity about the Battle of Berlin that we are going to look at today. As it could not be otherwise, this last point corresponds to Felix Steiner. As you all know, Hitler ordered Steiner during the afternoon of April 21st to attack southwards against the right flank of Zhukov's First Belarusian Front the following day. However, on April 22nd it was found that Steiner had not been able to carry out the attack. The question we have to ask is, what happened to Steiner during the following days? After failing to attack on April 22nd, Steiner remained stationed north of Berlin, trying to gather as many troops as possible that were near his sector. Finally, Soviet pressure pushed him westwards until he reached the vicinity of the town of Oranienburg. He took up defensive positions there once Berlin was surrounded and tried to prevent the Soviets from crossing the Havel River. During all these days, he continued to be ordered from Berlin to attack in a southerly direction. For his part, Steiner replied that this was his intention and that he had no plans to abandon his leader. However, with the few forces he had under his command, he could not carry out this penetration and advance the 30 kilometers that separated him from Hitler's bunker. When the city of Berlin fell, Steiner headed towards the British sector to surrender. He was then imprisoned until 1948 and faced charges at the Nuremberg trials, although they were eventually dropped. In 1953, he was recruited by the CIA to found the Society for Defense Studies in Germany, which was formed by a group of former German military personnel. Its objective was to be used as a propaganda tool and advisor for the rearmament of West Germany. He was also a founding member of Haie AG, which was an organization of former Waffen-SS officers that sought to clear the name of the SSS and help former members of that organization. Shortly before his death, he was able to publish 2 books entitled The Waffen-SS Volunteers and the Outlaw Army. Finally, Steiner died on May 12, 1966, a few days before his 70th birthday. So, what do you think of these aspects of the Battle of Berlin? If you would like to analyze the depth of the defense that Heinrici established on the Seelow Hills, I leave this program in the description.